Hey everybody, it's CyberDen again. Today we're going over the micro-itx custom case build that I'm working on. I'm going to take you through a little bit of the process of what I did to put it all together, where it stands now, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do some final thoughts and some first impressions. So let's get into it. So these are the three pieces of aluminum that I acquired. They are all 1/8 inch thick and roughly cost me about $78 in plus tax. And here I am marking off the corners as I want rounded front corners. So I took a piece of pipe and I did that, and then I began to cut the corners off with a cut-off wheel, or a whizzer wheel if you will call it. And then I filed them into, and then I perfected the corners by filing them manually, which took forever. So we're just gonna make it go a little bit faster. And that's roughly how the corners looked. Then I made a makeshift press brake here so I can do the bending of the side panels. Put it in a vise to hold it together so I could do my welding. Now this is the welding section. Now when you're using a torch like this, you definitely want to, safety is always key. Wear your safety glasses and your protective other eyewear from the light, because the light is very bright. And basically what is, I wouldn't necessarily consider this I wouldn't necessarily consider this weld, more along the lines of brazing, because you're heating up the metal with a torch, and then you're using the welding rod, and the heat from the metal is what actually melts it. So the welding rods that I'm using, supposedly you can use a propane torch to do this. However, at my work, I had an oxyacetylene torch available, so I decided to go ahead and do it. Now you can see how fast it actually melts, because the metal itself is what is melting the welding rod. Now in this section here, you could see the epitome of heat transfer. I have two metal blocks underneath holding it together, and they're essentially soaking up all of the heat, which is why it takes so long for it to heat up right here. Now if you watch the flame that is coming off in front, you will actually see the color change to an orange. That is when you know that the metal is actually heated enough to actually melt the welding rod. As you can see, it's starting to turn to that orange color, and as it heats up and the welding rod actually begins to melt, you see right here it's coming. There, you see the color changing to orange. That's when it's okay to start. That's when you know it's going to start melting. Like that. As you can see how quick it actually goes once it starts to actually heat up properly. Now here, this is how I'm drilling out the holes for the fans for the radiator. This is how I'm drilling out the holes for the fans for the radiator. Found a 4-inch hole saw is perfect for a 120 millimeter fan. I put two. Then of course you want to file the edges, because the edges are going to be very, very sharp, and you can actually cut yourself very easily with it. I've actually done it twice on this build so far. And then this is the case as it's done being put together. That hole there is for the power button, and the reservoir will go right there in that rectangular slot. And as you can see, the metal is very rough. It's uncleaned. Inside we have the holes for the power supply, the rear exhaust fan, and I even put a drain port in there for draining the loop after that's all finished. There's the two holes for the radiator, and you can see that bar going across. That is because apparently during the heating process, bottom panel bowed, so screw those into the bottom to bring it back to flat. That is considered a lesson learned. If I was ever to do this case again, I would actually cast the entire case so it's one piece. And I finished off the inside corners with this product called Quick Steel. You basically just cut a chunk off, you mix it all in until it turns this gray color, and then you break off a piece, and you want to kind of like roll it, kind of like when you're back when you were a kid playing with Play-Doh making hot dogs. You want to roll it just like that, so that way you can press it into the corners nice and neatly like this with your finger. You might want to use gloves because this stuff can get pretty sticky. Now, because of I chose to do this because of the finish that I have chosen to do on the inside, and I will get on more on that in a moment. But for now, you can see how this also helps hold the corners together as well. Say if I was to ever ship a case like this, shipping UPS, FedEx, and then you want to give it a good rough sanding before you go and you paint it. This actually took a little while, so we're just going to speed this up a bit. See, here we go. It's the fastest sander in the world. And you can see how it's going from a rough bare metal to a nice rough surface. That's for the primer to actually adhere to, and it's going to stick really good. Now, when you're priming, I just chose to use a regular rattle can. You want to make sure that you do all of your edges first, and then go in and do all of your other stuff. So as you can see right here, I'm going to come in. See that I went along the edge for the outside edge, and then I began to do that is so to prevent all the excess overspray. And you want to make sure you get nice, even, slow strokes at a nice distance so that you're not going to get anything overspray and built up and runny. Now I ended up putting about 3 or 4 coats of primer on here to actually get a nice, clean, black, finished product. I went over the entire inside and the outside because the inside I want a surface that is very durable, and the exterior is going to get a nice custom gloss color to it. Now this is after it's all been primered, so you can see it's nice and clean. It's very smooth. It hasn't been wet sanded yet because this is still wet, sitting at my work right now drying. So tomorrow I will go in and wet sand it, and then begin the final top coats. The interior, I want to be a nice matte finish, but also durable. So I'm going to be using duplicolored truck bed coating, just a spray-on coating for the interior, so that way it's not shiny, because all the components are going to be shiny, so I want the rest of it a nice matte finish. In the exterior, I'm actually going to be putting a lot of work into it. I'm going to be putting about 3 or 4 coats of a ceramic gloss black with wet sanding between coats, and then probably 3 or 4 more coats of clear with wet sanding, and then finally polishing and waxing. Now here's a quick little mock-up of of the components and where they're going to be going. Your power supply, graphics card, motherboard, radiator. It all sits in there nice and neat, and I think it's going to look really, really nice when it is done. Alright, so now we're back. So as you can see, that was the way the case was put together. One of the things I was talking about in the video was that little bar, that square bar that you can see going across one of the holes for one of the fan holes for the radiator. That was because when I was doing the welding, when I got to that one section where I was talking about where I had those iron bars underneath of it to hold the thing together, I believe it was that point that because I had to heat it so much and the heat spread out so much that the bottom portion of the case actually bowed up a little bit, just because of all the heat that I was putting into it. So I had to take those bars and screw 3 of them, evenly spaced out underneath, and then I had to put screws across to actually bring that bow back down to flat, and it was kind of unavoidable. So there's going to be a slight restriction in that one fan, but I don't think it's going to have any major effect on anything. It's going to have the radiator, and the fans are going to be on top of the radiator, so it should be okay. We'll have to find out after when it's all put together and we do some benchmarking and some overclocking and see what our temperatures are. Now that stuff that I was talking about, the quick steel that I was using to fill in on the corners, the only reason that I decided to go and use that stuff is because I didn't, getting in there and sanding down all those that welds is kind of a pain. Not like I haven't done it before, but I decided that the interior and the exterior, they're both going to be black, but they're going to be different blacks. What I'm going for on the interior is everything's going to be black, but like say, take the tubing for example. I'm going to be using clear tubing, rigid tubing, and I'm going to be using some of the black dye from XSPC. So that way, it's going to be black but clear on the outside. So it's going to have that kind of clear glow to it. as well as the motherboard. I've been teasing about vacuum forming the motherboard, and I've also decided that the radiator and fan assembly, I'm going to vacuum form that as well. So that way you're not going to be looking at a radiator and fans. You're going to be looking at it's going to be, clear acrylic with black on the inside, the same as the motherboard vacuum forming I'm going to do. So it's going to have that kind of like black underneath of clear effect with the white lighting inside there, and I think it's going to look really sweet when it's all put together and done. Um, Now that stuff can be sanded and filed and ground down to make it look a little bit nicer. However, it wasn't really necessary for what I'm going for the interior of the case. Like I said, I'm just going to be using some of the spray-on truck bed lining. The reason that I'm going with that is because number one, the durability of it. When you're in there, especially when you do a custom case like this, you're always going to be changing things. You might have to drill a couple extra holes. I want it to be a nice durable finish, so that way there's not going to be any scratches. And it also has a nice matte finish to it, so that way the interior body of the case is going to have that matte finish, and all of the components are going to have that clear on black effect, so that way they will stand out and pop more, as opposed to having a glossy interior, which would make everything blend together. But what I really wanted are the components. I want the components to pop, and I want them to show. So that's why I'm going with that on the interior. Plus, it also actually adds a minute amount of sound dampening because it goes on so thick. So it might bring the noise level down a little bit, which I don't think the noise level is going to be a problem much anyway. Now, as far as the exterior is concerned, I know I said that I was going to show you guys how to use automotive paint in a way that you don't need the compressor or a gun or anything like that. However, my budget for this build is kind of down to zero. So I'm just going to be using some rattle can. I'm going to be using, I've got the primer on there already, and for the exterior, I want to go for that, there's that mirror finish, and then there's that wet finish, which takes that mirror finish to a next step. Now what that does is when you lay down your paint, it's not completely flat. You get what's called orange peel. If you look at the skin of an orange, it's kind of like got that texture to it. It's the same thing with paint. When you lay down the paint, and after it dries, it's going to have that same kind of texture to it. So you want to do is take like some 2000, if you wanted to, you can take it even all the way to 3000 grit sandpaper, and you wet sand it. That cuts down that orange peel, and it makes the paint one slick layer. And you want to lay down like a coat or two, then you want to wet sand it, lay down another coat or two, then wet sand it. That way there's no orange peel at all, and your paint is still thick enough where you're not going to cut all the way down to your primer or even down into your metal. And you do the same exact thing with the clear coat. Lay on a coat or two, you wet sand it to knock the orange peel down, then you lay down another coat or two, and you wet sand it again. And that's what's going to give it that complete smooth finish with no orange peel between the layers. And then you go through it with a polish, which is even finer, and that's what's going to make it really pop. It's going to take any last bit of imperfection that is in the clear coat, even if you can't see it, it's going to take that off, and it's going to leave it with that nice wet mirror. Like if you look at yourself if you look at a mirror, that's cool, right? Now take that mirror and pour water on it. Now it looks like a wet mirror, which is even shinier and poppier, which is what I'm going to go for on the exterior. Don't worry, I'm going to take you through the entire process. You're going to get to watch it. I'll do some, I'll speed things up a little bit so you don't have to sit there and watch me spraying all day long. But that'll be in a future video. Also stay tuned for the vacuum forming videos. I've got my vacuum former. It's all set and ready to go. Stay tuned for the video on the custom water blocks. That's going to be a little while because I am still trying to acquire. Apparently you can only melt copper a certain amount of times before you can no longer melt it without having to add minerals to it. And the copper that I had melted about 3 times, and finally by the time I got around to making my own little home furnace for melting metal, it had already been melted too many times. So now I'm in the process of trying to acquire another chunk of copper for the project. The reason I'm not trying to go out and spend a whole lot of money on copper is because I'm still not 100% convinced that this is going to be a viable solution for our water blocks or another alternative. If worst comes to worst, I can go and order one from EK. They make great products. I'm not downing them at all. I've always used their products in all of my builds. But however, if doing this one block does turn out to be a viable solution and it works, then hooray for me. I can make my own water blocks now and I don't have to go and buy them. I can go and buy $20 worth of copper and a piece of acrylic. And oh, as far as that's concerned, I also found out how to do nickel plating at home using some white vinegar, some aluminum welding rods, and an extra power supply I have laying around. So that's going to be another video coming, provided that this water block thing works. So I'll be doing my own nickel plating as well. So stay tuned. There will be more coming, and it will be awesome. Den out.